The living room was bright, filled with soft music and the scent of fresh flowers. Glasses clinked, women laughed, and everything looked like a magazine spread. Natalie's bridal shower was as elegant as she was now. Sharp dress, perfect nails, a house that whispered money. Bridesmaids in pastel pinks circled around her, handing gifts wrapped in shiny bows. Grace stood quietly near the back, holding a small box wrapped in plain tissue paper. Her dress was simple, her hair gently pulled back. She watched Natalie laugh, remembered being kids together, riding bikes, whispering secrets at sleepovers. That girl felt far away now. When Natalie saw her, she smiled big, loud for everyone to see. "Gracie, you made it!" She opened her arms wide, but the hug was quick. It wasn't warm, it was for show. Grace stepped forward and held out the box. "Just something small," she said. Natalie took it and unwrapped it slowly, her long nails tugging at the tissue paper. Inside was an antique brooch, shaped like a delicate flower, small stones set into its petals. It caught the light in a quiet, lovely way. There was a beat of silence. Then Natalie laughed. "Girl," she said, turning the brooch over in her fingers. "This looks like something from a dead grandma's attic." The bridesmaids laughed with her. Not all of them, but enough. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," behind her hand. Another giggled into her champagne glass. Grace froze. She smiled, because she didn't know what else to do. Her eyes sparkled, not with joy, but with the tears she wouldn't let fall. Natalie passed the brooch to one of the bridesmaids. "This is so you, Jenna," she joked. "Vintage chic, right?" More laughter. Grace wanted to disappear. She wanted to reach out and take it back, but she didn't move. What no one knew, what Natalie didn't care to ask, was that the brooch had once belonged to Grace's mother. It was her favorite piece, worn every Sunday, always pinned near her heart. Grace had kept it safe after her mother passed, wrapped in the same tissue paper her mother used when she cleaned it, carefully folded in a box marked "Special." Grace had thought, hoped, it might mean something, not just as a gift, but as a memory, a piece of love shared from one friend to another, a small reminder of where they came from. But all Natalie saw was a cheap thing from a thrift store, something to laugh at. Grace stood still, heart pounding, cheeks burning. Around her, the party kept going. The music didn't stop, but something inside her did. Grace lived a quiet life. She worked long hours as a nurse in a small hospital. Her days were filled with caring for patients, checking charts, and sometimes holding a stranger's hand when they were scared. She didn't complain. She liked helping people. It made her feel close to her mother, who had always told her, "Kindness is your strength, Grace." Her mother had raised her alone. They didn't have much growing up. Second-hand clothes, shared rooms, homemade dinners. But Grace never felt poor. Her mum gave her love, comfort, and strong values. She taught Grace to work hard, stay humble, and believe in simple joys. When her mother passed away 2 years ago, everything changed. Grace still hadn't really healed. Some days, she would walk into the empty apartment and feel the silence like a weight. Her mother's things were still there. A few clothes, some old books, and one small box labeled "Special." Inside it was the brooch, gold-toned, shaped like a flower, with tiny stones set into the petals. Grace remembered watching her mum pin it on before church or family dinners. It was more than jewelry. It was a memory of safety, of love. Grace didn't wear the brooch often, but she kept it close. She thought giving it to Natalie, her oldest friend, would mean something. They had shared so much as children. Long summers, sleepovers, secrets whispered under blankets. Grace had trusted her more than anyone. Back then, they promised they'd always be close. But life took them in different directions. Natalie changed. After college, she met someone rich, married quickly, and moved into a life of travel, parties, and fancy clothes. Her social media was filled with perfect selfies, brand names, and quotes about living your best life. She smiled in every picture, but it felt more like a mask than anything real. Whenever they talked now, Natalie's words were shiny but shallow. She made little comments like, "You're still in that old apartment," or "Nursing must be so exhausting." She didn't mean to sound rude, but Grace felt the distance. It was like Natalie had climbed a ladder and never looked down to see if Grace was still holding on. Grace didn't try to chase her. She told herself people grow apart. But when the wedding invitation arrived, hand-delivered with glittering gold letters, Grace felt a strange mix of surprise and confusion. She hadn't been part of Natalie's life for years. Why now? The bridal shower came next, then messages from the other bridesmaids about dresses and gifts and games. Grace said yes, but in her heart she wondered, did Natalie really want her there, or was she just ticking off a box? Still, she tried. She wanted to believe their bond meant something. She spent weeks thinking about a gift. Money was tight, but she wanted it to be personal. That's when she thought of the brooch. It had love in it, history. Maybe it would remind Natalie of who they used to be, but it didn't. Natalie laughed at it like it was junk. Grace stood there, frozen, pretending it didn't hurt, while the room filled with fake smiles and cruel giggles. That night, Grace went home to her quiet apartment. She took off her shoes, sat on the edge of her bed, and stared at the empty spot on her dresser where the brooch used to rest. A small piece of her past was gone, given away and thrown aside like it meant nothing. She thought about Natalie, all the years between them, the girl who used to braid her hair and share dreams about the future. That girl was gone. In her place was someone who cared more about filters and followers than friendship. Grace lay back on her bed and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel sad. She felt something sharper, something like a crack starting to form inside her. She wasn't sure if it was grief, anger, or both. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the sound of Natalie's laugh still ringing in her ears, the way the other girls had looked at her, the way they had smiled with pity, or worse, amusement, kept playing in her mind. She sat up, turned on her lamp, and pulled out her laptop. For some reason, she typed in the words she never thought she would. 1920s flower brooch vintage. Her mom had once told her the brooch might be worth something, but Grace had never looked it up. It wasn't about money. It was about her mom's love. That was the real value. But now, after everything that happened, she wanted to know more. After a few minutes of scrolling, her heart skipped. There, on the screen, was a photo that looked almost exactly like her brooch. Same shape, same tiny stones. The description read, 1920s Cartier floral brooch. Rare. Estimated value, $40,000. Grace's hands froze on the keyboard. She clicked the link and read more. It was part of a small collection from the early 20th century, known for its fine detail and limited pieces. Only a few were ever made. It had been shown in a museum once. Some collectors were still searching for it. She leaned back slowly, her heart pounding. Her mum's brooch wasn't just special because it came from her. It was rare, expensive, and full of history. She remembered a moment from her childhood. Her mom was brushing Grace's hair, and the brooch was pinned to her sweater. Grace had touched it and asked, "Why do you always wear that?" Her mom smiled. "Some things are priceless because they carry love," she had said. "Others carry stories too big for their surface." Grace never forgot those words, but now they meant something new. The pain of the bridal shower came back even sharper. Natalie hadn't just laughed at a cheap old pin. She'd laughed at something full of meaning, beauty, and history, something Grace had given with all her heart. She didn't message Natalie. She didn't ask for it back. She didn't say anything in the group chat either. The next day, when someone asked if she was coming to the bridesmaid brunch, she didn't answer. One by one, she started skipping things: a dress fitting, a spa day, a meeting about flower arrangements. The group chat filled with photos and jokes, but Grace stayed quiet. She wasn't sure if she was angry, sad, or just tired. Maybe all three. The old feeling of not being enough returned, like she was just a background character in someone else's story. She had pushed down her grief for so long, tried to be strong, polite, calm, but now it was all rising to the surface. She looked at her phone and saw Natalie's name pop up with a message. "Hope you're okay. Haven't heard from you. Let me know if you're still in for wedding stuff. No pressure." Grace stared at the screen for a long time. Then she turned off her phone and left it on the table. For the first time in a long time, she chose not to respond. The days passed slowly. Grace stayed quiet. The bridal shower incident played over and over in her mind. She avoided the group messages and the wedding events. A few bridesmaids noticed and sent short, polite messages, but no one really pushed. Most just moved on without her. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a wedding schedule. It had everyone's name and role for the big day. Grace looked through the list. Bridesmaids: Jenna, Brooke, Ashley, and 2 others she barely knew. She kept reading and saw her name near the bottom, next to a job title she didn't expect: Flower Supervisor. Grace blinked. She read it again. Not a bridesmaid, not even a guest speaker. Flower Supervisor. A made-up role. Something like helping the florist carry things or checking the petals for the flower girl. It was the kind of task a distant cousin might get, not a childhood best friend. Her face went warm with shock, then cold with disappointment. It wasn't just the title, it was the message behind it. She had been pushed aside again, but this time it felt final. She remembered how Natalie once cried on her shoulder in college, heartbroken after a breakup. How Grace had skipped work to stay up with her all night, comforting her. She remembered, more clearly now, how Natalie had borrowed money from her that year, $400 to pay rent. Grace gave it with no question. Natalie promised she'd pay it back. She never did. Back then, Grace didn't ask again. She told herself friendship was more important. But now, that memory stung. Grace had always given. Her time, her love, even her mother's brooch. And what did she get in return? She opened her laptop and stared again at the brooch online. She wanted to learn more. The curiosity had grown stronger since discovering its value. The more she read, the deeper she went into the brooch's history. Some pieces in the same collection had notes attached. Auction records. Article. One name popped up again and again. Cartier stolen auction items. 1930. Land dispute. Theft claims. She clicked a scanned newspaper article from the 1940s. There it was. Her eyes froze on the headline. Cartier heirloom dispute. Local family accused in antique theft. She read the article carefully. A wealthy landowner had taken property during a financial dispute after the Great Depression. It mentioned a brooch, floral-shaped, gold with small gemstones. It had been taken from a woman named Eleanor Burke, Grace's great-grandmother. Grace's mouth went dry. She checked the other names in the article. The landowner's wife, the one who ended up with the brooch, was Beatrice Harland. Harland, Natalie's last name before she got married. Grace's heart pounded. Her stomach turned. She pulled out an old family photo her mother had once shown her. There was Eleanor, smiling, wearing the same brooch. There was no mistake. This wasn't just a beautiful gift from her mother. It was a part of her family's lost past. Something taken, something hidden. Natalie had mocked her for giving it, but Natalie's family had stolen it long ago. Grace sat at her kitchen table stunned. She felt like the ground had shifted under her. This wasn't just about a rude comment anymore. It wasn't just about a selfish friend or a cruel joke. This was bigger. It was about legacy, about generations of harm, about something that should have stayed in her family but was ripped away, and then laughed at by the great-granddaughter of the person who took it. She felt a deep sadness grow inside her. She thought of her mother, wearing that brooch proudly, never knowing the full story. She thought of all the times Grace had looked up to Natalie, forgiven her, supported her. It felt like her trust had been broken 100 times, and she had only just realized it. The wedding was getting closer. She still hadn't spoken to Natalie, and Natalie hadn't asked where she'd gone. Grace wondered if she even noticed she'd gone quiet. Her phone buzzed with another message. This one was from a bridesmaid. "Hey, just checking in. You okay? Everyone's saying you've been distant." Grace didn't answer. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel guilty for pulling away. She felt like she had finally seen the full picture, not just of the brooch, but of her friendship with Natalie. A friendship built on childhood memories, yes, but also one-sided effort. Grace had held on to the past, while Natalie had built a new life and left her behind. The pain wasn't just emotional anymore, it felt historical. It felt like she had been carrying a weight her mother and grandmother had carried too, and now she knew why. But this time, she didn't want to carry it in silence. Something inside her had changed. Not loud, not angry, but strong, quietly strong. She didn't know what she was going to do yet, but she knew this. She wasn't going to be silent anymore. The wedding day arrived with sunshine, soft music, and flowers everywhere. Guests filled the large garden where the ceremony was being held. Everything looked perfect. Laughter floated through the air. Glasses clinked, and people smiled for photos. Grace stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, wearing a simple dress and holding a small envelope in her hand. She hadn't come for revenge. She didn't want to cause a scene, but she couldn't leave things unfinished either. Something inside her told her this was the moment to speak, not with anger, but with truth. After the ceremony and dinner, the time came for the reception speeches. Friends and family took turns standing up, sharing stories and toasts. There were jokes, tears, claps and cheers. Then Natalie stood up to speak, glowing in her designer gown. She thanked everyone, laughed easily, and smiled like the star of a movie. When she sat back down, the crowd applauded. Grace took a deep breath and slowly stood. The room quieted. Some people looked confused. A few bridesmaids exchanged glances. Natalie's smile froze a little when she saw Grace walk to the front with the envelope in her hand. Grace cleared her throat. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice was calm. "I wasn't sure I was going to speak today," she began, "but I think my mother would have wanted me to." There was a pause. The room waited. "I gave Natalie a brooch at her bridal shower," Grace continued. "It was wrapped in tissue paper. It wasn't in a shiny box. It didn't have a brand tag or come with a receipt, but it was my mother's. She wore it on special days. She called it her lucky charm." The village, unsure and curious, began to change. Children began walking beside her, asking if they could help. A young man offered her fresh fruit from the market stall. Even a few elders nodded at her when she passed. Not everyone believed. Not everyone changed. But something was shifting. Her kindness, once invisible, now had a glow that couldn't be denied. Still, Nafia didn't let it change her heart. She never bragged, never told stories. She never reminded anyone of how they once treated her. She simply did what she had always done. She chose good, and the more she gave, the brighter her steps became. The shoes were no longer just magical. They were a mirror of her soul. They didn't shine because of spells or secrets. They shined because she forgave, because she loved, because she gave light, even when all she was given was darkness. Day after day, she walked the same paths through Zubuta, the paths she once walked with her head down. Now, she walked with quiet dignity, her steps leaving behind more than footprints. They left behind a message. That light doesn't always come from power. Sometimes it comes from softness, from mercy, from choosing to be better, even when the world isn't. And slowly, the people began to understand. The glow wasn't a curse. It wasn't even a blessing in the way they thought. It was proof that even the girl covered in mud could carry gold in her heart. The more the villagers noticed Nafia's glowing shoes, the more uneasy Mwaso became. Day by day, she watched from the shadows of their compound as Nafia walked gracefully, her shoes shining like morning stars. Mwaso's heart twisted with something sharp and ugly, jealousy. To her, those shoes were not a symbol of kindness, they were a threat. She didn't understand how the girl she had humiliated for so long was now being looked at with awe, with respect. It felt like the village was forgetting who Nafia was, forgetting all the mud she had been made to kneel in, and Mwaso couldn't take. One morning, as Nafia swept the compound, Mwaso's anger boiled over. Her voice sliced through the air, loud and bitter. "Witch!" she screamed, pointing at Nafia's glowing shoes. "You bewitched them all! You used dark magic to make them look at you!" The village children stopped playing. Neighbors turned their heads. But Nafia didn't fight back. She just stood there, calm, quiet, her eyes sad, but not afraid. And that silence only made Mwaso rage more. In a fit of fury, she lunged toward Nafia and tried to yank the shoes from her feet. But the moment her hands touched them, the glow pulsed, bright and hot, and Mwaso stumbled back, her fingers stinging with heat. That night, while the village slept under the soft cover of stars, Mwaso crept into the room where Nafia lay. The girl was deep in sleep, her face peaceful, her heart untroubled. Beside her bed, the shoes rested, still glowing faintly, still waiting. Mwaso's hands trembled as she reached out, eyes wide with greed and fear. She snatched the shoes and ran back to her own room, heart pounding like thunder. She didn't hesitate. She wanted the glow, the attention, the praise. She slipped one foot in, then the other. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the shoes began to burn, not like fire, not with flames, but with a deep, searing heat that came from inside the gold, from the vines, from the very soul of the shoes. Mwaso screamed. She tried to rip them off, but they clung to her like they had grown roots into her skin. The glow twisted into dark red, then black, and with one final burst of light, the shoes turned to ash, crumbling around her blistered feet. She fell to the ground, crying, not just from the pain, but from the terror, because in that moment she realized the truth. The shoes were never meant for just anyone. They were not made from magic that could be stolen. They were made from kindness, from forgiveness, from something pure she had never carried in her own heart. Word of what happened spread quickly through Zubuta. Some said it was justice. Others called it a warning. Mwaso no longer looked at Nafia with power or pride. She looked at her with fear, with guilt, because now she understood. Those shoes had chosen Nafia, not the other way around. And no matter how hard she tried, she could never wear something built on a heart so different from hers. And Nafia, she said nothing. She never spoke of that night. She simply kept walking, her steps still light, her heart still kind. The glow returned to her feet in the mornings, brighter than before, as if the shoes knew they belonged. And the village watched with quiet respect, knowing that what Mwaso tried to steal could never be taken by force, because true light only shines from within. Far away from the quiet village of Zubuta, in a grand palace filled with gold walls and polished marble floors, sat Prince Luwando, known across the land for his sharp mind and curious heart. He listened often to travelers who brought stories from all corners of the kingdom. One day, an old herbalist came to the palace with a tale unlike any other. Between sips of tea and the sorting of herbs, the man spoke of a village girl whose shoes glowed when she chose to forgive, even those who hurt her. A girl covered in mud, raised by cruelty, yet full of kindness. Prince Luwando leaned in closer, every word pulling him deeper into wonder. A girl with glowing shoes who forgives those who wound her, he repeated, eyes lit with thought. This was no ordinary rumor. This was something worth seeing with his own eyes. The very next day, without telling anyone his real purpose, the prince set off for Zubuta, dressed as a simple trader. His royal robes were replaced with a dusty cloak. He left behind his guards and titles, choosing the quiet path through forests and fields. The journey was long, but his mind was busy with questions. Who was this girl? What kind of heart could glow so brightly in a world so cold? When he finally arrived in Zubuta, the village seemed like any other. Huts lined with straw, women carrying baskets, children playing with sticks and stones. But then, in the middle of a narrow path, he saw her. She was not dressed in fine clothes. Her hands were rough from work. Her hair was tied back with a strip of old cloth. But her smile was gentle and real. She was kneeling next to a small child who had fallen, wiping tears from his dusty face, whispering something kind. And as she stood to help the child to his feet, the prince saw it, the soft golden glow around her feet. Not bright, not flashy, but steady and alive. The shoes shimmered like warm morning light, responding to her kindness like a flower opening to the sun. He felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just a story. She was real, and everything the herbalist had said seemed small compared to the quiet power he was witnessing now. This girl, without knowing it, had brought light into a village that once turned its back on her. She didn't shout or demand attention. She didn't tell people what she had been through. She simply helped, again and again, and somehow the world around her was beginning to change because of it. Prince Luwando didn't speak to her right away. He watched from a distance as she gave food to an old man, carried water for a tired mother, and smiled at a girl who had dropped her clay pot. Every act made the glow a little brighter, and every act made him want to know her more. He realized that this wasn't just magic, it was a heart choosing peace over pain. It was someone turning wounds into warmth, As the sun set over Zubuta and the village prepared for night, the prince knew one thing for sure. This girl, this Nafia, was unlike anyone he had ever met, not because of her shoes, but because of the soul that made them shine.